Sixth and finally, one more hot take. I want to cover an article in the Sydney Morning Herald, which comes from Gina Rushton, and it's a little bit incoherent. It's about a recent school strike for climate event, and she opens as follows. I'm not a Gen Z climate activist. I'm just another millennial woman who has been guilty of berating herself for considering bringing a child into a climate crisis. And she seems to suggest that maybe she shouldn't have many kids, but that maybe she should. She says at first that she shouldn't have many kids, but then she says maybe I should because it's not my fault. It's the government's fault. And her conclusion, therefore, is don't despair, be angry at the government. So it doesn't make a lot of sense. The conclusion is this. In the anxiety of considering parenthood in a changing climate, anger feels like the necessary bridge between delusion and defeat. Unlike contrition, which folds us into ourselves, seeking redemption in a handful of consumer choices, anger has an object, another to be held accountable. So she says, I'll have my kids because it's someone else's trouble, it's the government. Like I said, a little bit incoherent, but tapping into something that's been going on for a while now, namely the view that the population needs to be controlled and that virtuous people don't have big families. I even experienced this when I was at school. It was starting then, and people would some types would turn their nose up at the fact that you had a big family, a big car, and you're churning emissions and all the rest of it. I want to observe something. This whole line of thinking stems fundamentally from godlessness. It can only arise in a context where a person does not believe that God is who he is. Namely, that he made this present world, that he has determined its end from its beginning, and in the meantime he sustains it. John chapter 1, Colossians chapter 1, it says it in a range of places. If you untether yourself from that basic truth of reality, you end up guilty of having children in a climate crisis. You end up helpless. You end up probably very anxious indeed, because this random chaos of a universe may collapse in on you at any moment. But for those of us who know that God is who he says he is, notice something very important from Genesis chapter 8. There are two things said directly in parallel, said at the very same time. The first is a command to have children and to multiply. This is a repeat of the command in Genesis chapter 1 when God creates male and female. It says, whoever sheds human blood, by man his blood shall be shed, for in the image of God he made mankind. As for you, be fruitful and multiply, populate the earth abundantly and multiply in it. Right? But the climate types get all wobbly at the knees at this point, and they say, but we'll end the planet, but I'm so guilty of causing all this trouble for the planet, of ruining the paradigm that we're in. Now, that's precisely why, in practically the same breath, God says, I will never again destroy every living thing as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, but more specific than that, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. So what does it mean? If you marry, and if you can, children are not optional. They are mandated. Furthermore, in following through on that mandate, the one thing that we don't need to do is get all worried about those matters which are in God's jurisdiction, namely whether our kids will end the world or whether the world will end on our kids. The world will end, and I strongly suspect that Jesus will mess it up fairly badly anyway when he does end it. I know there's two schools of thought on that, but the point is this, fine, we don't pillage the earth. I don't believe in any of that stuff. And yeah, there's a certain level of stewardship that can be justified and that is good. But it is to say this, have confidence in what is fundamentally becoming an age of fear.